People always say you should listen to your gut. But the truth is, sometimes your gut doesn't speak in words. It speaks in moments. How someone looks at you when they think you're not paying attention, or the silence that lingers just a little too long after a question. Looking back now, I realized my gut had been whispering to me for months. I just didn't want to hear it. My name's Micah, and I run a small but steady mobile detailing business in Atlanta. I built it from scratch. Me, a van, and a pressure washer. It's not flashy. I don't wear a suit to work. I don't sit in meetings with espresso machines and glass walls. But I've got repeat clients, full bookings, and I take pride in what I do. Real pride, the kind that sticks to your hands and doesn't wash off after a 12-hour shift. I met Claire 2 years ago at a charity 5K. She was all brightness and polish, a marketing director for some sleek tech startup. The kind of woman who seemed to glide through rooms while everyone else had to walk. I remember how she smiled at me when I told her what I did. It was a real smile back then. At least I thought so. We moved fast, faster than I normally would have been comfortable with, but something about her energy made everything feel urgent, like we were always catching a wave. Within a year, we were engaged. I thought I was finally building the kind of life people talk about in quiet, grateful moments. Then came her company's holiday party. It was at a rooftop bar in Midtown, one of those places with overpriced drinks and soft jazz playing over the buzz of people pretending they're not stressed. I felt out of place the second I walked in. Everyone was in tailored jackets and shiny shoes, sipping cocktails with names I couldn't pronounce. Claire had told me to wear something business casual. I went with a navy shirt and my best jeans. I thought I looked decent, but the second she saw me, something in her expression flickered. She forced a smile, adjusted my collar like I was her kid brother, and told me to just relax and try not to talk too much about cars and trucks. Stung, but I laughed it off. I didn't want to be sensitive. I didn't want to cause a scene. I spent most of the evening standing next to her while she floated between conversations like a politician. I kept catching bits and pieces of her introducing me to coworkers. "This is Micah. He's an entrepreneur," she'd say with a little wink, but it was always followed by, "He runs a car cleaning service. Mobile detailing. He's really good at it." The way she said it was always just off, like she was trying to sell a product she didn't quite believe in. And then it happened. Near the end of the night, one of her coworkers, some guy named Brent who clearly had a little too much Cabernet, asked how I managed to keep my business afloat without a real office. I chuckled, trying to be good-natured about it. But before I could answer, Claire chimed in, laughing a little too loud. "He just drives around in a van all day. He's like Atlanta's mobile Mr. Clean. You should see his playlists. He has a whole Spotify folder called Wax On, Wax Off. It's adorable." Everyone laughed, including her. Especially her. And something inside me broke. Quietly. It wasn't the joke. It was the way she looked at me when she said it, like I was this silly little side character in her high-rise life. A mascot, something she could polish up for pictures but tuck away when the lights came on. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just waited until the laughter died down. And then I leaned in and said quietly, but clearly, "I'm heading out. Don't come home tonight." The look on her face, I'll never forget it. The confusion, then panic, and finally, that flicker of realization. I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked to the elevator, rode it down 17 floors in silence, and stepped out into the night like a man who had finally learned to hear what his gut had been saying all along. I didn't go back to our apartment. I didn't check my phone. I just drove somewhere with no rooftop bars, somewhere quiet. And for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel like I was chasing a wave. I felt like I was finally learning how to stand still. The strangest thing about leaving someone isn't the drama. It's the silence. That deep, unsettling calm that follows after you do something irreversible. No yelling, no doors slamming, no dramatic speeches. Just quiet. Like the universe takes a deep breath and waits to see what you'll do next. That night after I walked out of Claire's office party, I didn't go home. I didn't even go to a hotel. I ended up at a gas station an hour outside the city, sipping bad coffee at 2 o'clock in the morning and staring at the windshield like it held some kind of answer. My phone buzzed nonstop for the first 30 minutes. Calls, texts, voicemails. Then it went dead silent. That silence felt louder than anything she could have said. She didn't come looking for me, didn't ask where I'd gone. And deep down, I knew why. She wasn't shocked that I'd left. She was shocked that I finally noticed. Over the next few days, I crashed on a friend's couch, my buddy Elijah, who runs a tattoo shop off Boulevard. We've known each other since high school, but we drifted once I got engaged. I guess I stopped showing up for people when I started trying so hard to be someone Claire wouldn't be embarrassed by. Elijah didn't say much when I showed up at 1 a.m. with nothing but a duffel bag and a hollow look in my eyes. He just opened the door, handed me a blanket and said, "About time." I didn't respond. I didn't know how. How do you explain to someone that you spent 2 years loving a version of a person that never actually existed? On the third day, Claire finally sent a message. Just one. No apology, no explanation, just, "I think we need to talk, but if you're going to make this public and dramatic, maybe we shouldn't." I read it 5 times. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was tired. The message wasn't meant to reconnect. It was meant to control the narrative. She was more worried about appearances than the fact that our engagement was disintegrating like tissue paper in the rain. What haunted me most wasn't the party. It wasn't even the joke. It was realizing how often she'd made me feel small in ways so subtle. I mistook them for affection. Like the time I landed a big contract detailing fleet cars for a film production. She said, "That's cute. You're like the blue-collar guy in a rom-com." Or when I bought new equipment and she smiled and said, "Ah, investing in your hobby. Love that for you." A hobby. I had poured my entire being into building something from nothing. Late nights, missed birthdays, maxed out credit cards. And to her, it was a hobby. A cute little detour on the way to something she could show off at brunch. But now the veil was off. And once you see clearly, you can't unsee. That night, I sat on Elijah's back porch, listening to the city hum in the distance. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat with the quiet, let it wrap around me. I thought about the ring sitting in my glove compartment, still in the little velvet box she'd insisted we upgrade to. She wanted something photo-worthy for Instagram. It hadn't been about the promise. It had been about the post. I pulled out my phone and finally opened the gallery. Dozens of photos of us, curated, filtered, positioned. I saw it all differently now. I wasn't her partner. I was a prop. The grounded, humble guy that made her seem more relatable in a sea of corporate jargon and digital perfection. And somehow, in that realization, I started to feel free. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity, sharp and clean. I was never going to be enough for the image she wanted to project. Not because I lacked value, but because her definition of value was always external. Titles, applause, appearances. The next morning, I started packing the few things I'd left at our place. She wasn't there. Just a note on the counter. "You could have handled that better. No, Claire. You could have loved me better. But that would have required seeing me for who I really was, not who you hoped I could become if I just polished up the rough edges enough to match your world." And I wasn't rough. I was real. There's this weird moment after a breakup that no one really talks about. It's not the crying part or the fighting part. It's the part where you wake up and realize you no longer have to pretend. You sit on the edge of a borrowed bed in clothes that still smell like the life you left. And you feel hollow. But in that hollowness, there's something else. A space that used to be filled with second-guessing and self-editing. And now it's just air. Cold, honest air. That morning, I sat there for maybe 20 minutes staring at my socks. I hadn't even unpacked the rest of my duffel bag. Everything felt like it belonged to another version of me. One that knew exactly how to navigate her world without drawing too much attention. One that nodded and smiled and shrank a little every time someone asked, "So, what do you do?" And she jumped in before I could answer. I think I was tired for a long time. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep, but the kind that builds when you're constantly trying to prove that you deserve to stand beside someone who looks at you like your background noise. I don't think she meant to do it. That's the strangest part. I don't think she was cruel. I think she just never really saw me. Not once, not fully. And that realization doesn't hit like thunder. It lands like dust. Quiet and everywhere. I drove to the apartment that day not to see her, but to pick up a toolbox I'd left in the hall closet. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want closure. I just wanted my things. Something solid to hold. Something mine. The door was unlocked. Of course, it was. She always said locking it made her feel paranoid. That should have been a red flag in hindsight, not the door thing, but the way she'd treat caution like a flaw. She used to call my practicality small thinking, like buying tools instead of vacations was some moral failure. But those tools had helped me survive. They'd gotten me from a rusted-out garage in my cousin's backyard to full-time contracts and a waiting list. She wasn't home, which was a relief. Her side of the apartment looked the same. Spotless, curated, almost staged. Mine looked like I'd evaporated. No photos, no jackets. Even the mug I always used had been moved. I stood in the kitchen for a second, and I swear the silence felt smug. I took the toolbox. I left the ring not in some dramatic way. I just placed it gently on the windowsill where the morning light was coming in soft and wide. It looked peaceful there, like it finally had a place that made sense. On the way out, I passed the hallway mirror and caught my reflection. Something had shifted. I didn't look broken. I didn't look angry. I looked real, like I'd stopped pretending to be the kind of man who fits into a story someone else was writing. And as I closed the door, I felt something settle. Not grief, not regret, just relief. Like I'd finally stepped off a stage and into my own skin again. There's more to say, a lot more. But for now, I'm letting the silence speak. Not because I'm afraid to talk, but because I'm learning how to listen to the parts of me that stopped speaking while I was too busy being polite. There are moments in a relationship that don't feel like anything special at the time. No spotlight, no big music cue, just tiny gestures, quiet exchanges. Things you never think to take a photo of. You never frame them, but somehow, when it all falls apart, they're the scenes that replay the loudest. I remember once, maybe 6 months before the engagement, Claire was late picking me up from an oil change. I was standing outside the shop, hands in my hoodie, the air still smelling like tire rubber and old coffee. She pulled up in her car, windows down, music playing softly, something French, I think. And when I climbed in, she smiled without looking at me and said, "I love how you smell like work." It was such a small thing, but I swear it stopped time for a second. Felt honest, like she saw me, like she liked what she saw. I don't know when that changed. No, that's a lie. I do know. It didn't happen in one day. It happened in the erosion of those little moments, the kind we never think to protect. You don't notice they're missing until the silence in between becomes louder than the laughter ever was. This week, I moved into a short-term rental. Quiet place, small. Creaky floors, outdated appliances. But there's sunlight in the mornings, and I can hear birds again. Not traffic, not podcasts playing at double speed. Just the sound of air, real air. And it feels like the first place in months where I can just exist without adjusting the volume of who I am. I haven't seen Claire. She hasn't reached out since that note on the counter. But I've seen traces of her. Mutual friends who don't know what to say. Photos I didn't ask to see. Posts that slide into my feed like ghosts. And always the way she smiles in those pictures. Like nothing ever touched her. Like the weight of what we were didn't leave even a smudge. Do I hate her? No. That would be too easy, too convenient. Hate is clean, sharp, decisive. This is murkier. This disappointment in slow motion. It's mourning a version of someone who probably never existed outside the idea I had of her. That's the part that stings the most. Not losing her, but realizing I never really had her to begin with. I keep thinking about this one drawer in our old place. The junk drawer, we called it. Everyone has one. Batteries, receipts, paper clips, keys to forgotten locks. I always joked about cleaning it out. She said it made her anxious, the randomness, the disorder. But now I wonder if that drawer was the only honest thing in that whole apartment. A place where nothing had to match. Nothing had to make sense. Things could just be there, unexamined. Like me, I've been journaling more. Not because I want to become a writer, but because some nights the silence feels like a question I don't know how to answer. And writing gives shape to that question, even if I don't know the answer yet. I write about things that don't matter. What the sky looked like at 4 p.m. The smell of clean towels. A memory of a conversation from 5 years ago that suddenly feels more important than it did at the time. I'm not trying to heal quickly. I'm not reading those articles about how to move on, or listening to the podcasts that tell you to reclaim your power, or cut toxic people out of your life. I'm not angry. I'm just learning how to sit with the truth. And the truth is, I let myself get so small inside something I thought was love that now I have to stretch just to find where my edges are. I've stopped explaining what happened to people. When friends ask how I'm doing, I just nod and say, getting there. That's all. No performance, no summary, no need to relive the party, the joke, the way her laugh burned in my chest like a slow bruise. I'm not a chapter in her story anymore, and she's not the ending to mine. If there's one thing I've started to understand, it's this: not everything lost is a failure. Some things are removed to make space for what's actually waiting, and I don't know what's next. I'm not rushing to fill the silence. For the first time, I'm letting it breathe, and it feels like honesty. A strange thing happens when life starts looking normal again. You expect relief, peace maybe, but instead, it feels like putting on a jacket that doesn't quite fit anymore. The sleeves are too short. The fabric itches. Everything looks the same, but somehow it all feels off. It had been 3 weeks since I ended the engagement, and I'd fallen into a kind of rhythm, the kind where your body shows up even when your mind doesn't. Mornings were simple. Coffee, check the day's schedule, grab my gear, and head to the next job. A Lexus interior here, a beat-up pickup truck there. Each car had its own story, written in smudges and spilled coffee and sand pressed into carpet fibers. And I like that. Cars don't pretend. They don't try to impress you. They just carry whatever life throws into them. There's an honesty in that. But even as I worked, there was this low, dull sound behind everything, like a refrigerator humming too loudly in the next room. I couldn't name it, but I knew what it felt like: displacement. Like I'd stepped out of one version of my life but hadn't quite stepped into the next one yet. It was worse in the grocery store. That's the part no one tells you about. It's not the big things that trip you up. It's the bananas, the crackers, the frozen pizza aisle. I found myself staring at a brand of hummus she used to like, holding it in my hand for a few seconds longer than necessary. Not out of nostalgia, just muscle memory. My cart had gaps in it where her habits used to be. And somehow that stung more than the party did. And then there were people, friends who meant well, friends who called and didn't know what to say. One of them, Mason, invited me out for drinks. I almost said no, but something in me figured it was time to re-enter the world, or at least pretend like I had. We met at a quiet bar off Peachtree, the kind with dim lighting and booths that creak when you slide in. He asked gently how I was doing, and I told him fine. Not because it was true, but because breaking down in a bar isn't something I was ready for. He nodded and took a sip of his beer, then said something that caught me completely off guard. She always made you feel smaller. You know that? I froze for a second, then shrugged. She's ambitious. I respected that. That's not what I said, he replied. I said she made you feel smaller, like you were always auditioning for a part in her movie. I didn't answer because he was right. And I hated that I hadn't seen it sooner, or worse, that I had but kept hoping I'd eventually grow into the version of me she wanted. After that, I stopped trying to rewrite the past. I stopped making excuses for her or overanalyzing the way she laughed at that party or wondering what I could have done differently. There's a difference between reflecting and reopening wounds. And I was tired of bleeding for something that had already ended. That night, as I drove home, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. Not the tired version, not the heartbroken one, just me. And for a split second, I realized I didn't miss her. I missed the idea of being seen, but not by someone who only looked at me when it made her shine. There's a lie people like to tell after a breakup. It goes like this: the place just feels empty now. But that's not true. Emptiness is clean. Emptiness is peaceful. What's left behind after someone goes, really goes, isn't emptiness. It's noise. It's fragments. It's a series of echoes that bounce around walls that were never built to hold this kind of silence. A few days ago, I went back to the apartment. Not because I wanted to, but because the landlord needed both sets of keys turned in. Claire had already moved out, at least physically. Emotionally, it was like she hadn't left at all. Her scent still lived in the hallway, that expensive, floral citrus perfume she wore like armor. Her handwriting still marked the whiteboard on the fridge. Spin class Wednesday 6 p.m., written in red marker like it meant something sacred. And worst of all, her energy still hummed in the corners. The way someone's voice lingers in a room long after the door closes. I didn't stay long, just enough to walk through each room and make sure I hadn't left anything behind. But I realized halfway through that it wasn't my stuff I was scanning for. It was myself. I was looking for the version of me that had existed here. The man who once waited up at the kitchen table with 2 bowls of late-night ramen while she took a quick call that lasted 90 minutes. The man who kept quiet when she'd gently mock his business in front of her colleagues, thinking, she's not trying to hurt me, she's just playing to her audience. The man who mistook being tolerated for being loved. There's something eerie about touching the doorknobs you used to open every day and realizing they don't feel like yours anymore. Like they've been reset, wiped clean. And in a way, maybe they have. The apartment wasn't haunted. I was not by her, but by who I had to become to keep her happy. I walked into the closet, half expecting to see one of her scarves or a heel left behind. Nothing. Just my old winter coat. The one she once called too working class for holiday photos. I smiled a little. That coat had seen more real winters than she ever did. I wore it out the door. The drive back was quiet. No music, no phone calls, just the sound of tires on pavement and that low rattle in the back of the van I never seemed to fix. And somewhere along that empty stretch of road, it hit me. I don't need to be angry to move on. I don't need to destroy photos or block numbers or rewrite the past into something uglier than it was. I just need to tell the truth. Not to her, to myself. We never fit. Not in the subtle ways that matter. Not in the glances across a dinner table. Not in the jokes that landed with a thud. Not in the spaces where love lives quietly, not loudly. She wanted something curated. I wanted something steady. She liked the idea of real, but only when it didn't come with messy hands and unpredictable work schedules. And that's okay. Really. I'm learning how to let okay be enough. Back at my new place, I unpacked the last of my boxes. I hung 2 photos on the wall. One of my dad standing next to a beat-up Camaro he rebuilt from junk. And one of me at 14 holding a bucket and a rag next to my first ever detailing job. A neighbor's minivan. No filters, no posing, just grit and quiet pride. This place is smaller. The light is uneven. There's a draft by the kitchen window, but it feels more mine in a week than that apartment ever did in 2 years. Funny, isn't it? Sometimes starting over doesn't look like a fresh canvas. It looks like walking through your past with your shoulders back and your voice steady, whispering, "This didn't break me. This just taught me where I no longer belong." Note 1. The night after. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of heartbreak, not even anger. It was the strange ache, like I'd carried something too heavy for too long and finally set it down, only to realize my arms didn't know what to do now. I kept reaching out in the dark, half expecting your shape beside me. But it wasn't about missing you. It was about muscle memory. I think even our loneliness gets trained. Note 2. Tuesday afternoon, waiting in the van. You once said my job was weather-dependent, like that was some kind of weakness. Like a man who adjusts his life based on clouds can't be trusted to hold someone steady. I want you to know the sky didn't look great today, but I worked anyway. A truck that smelled like old coffee and cigarette smoke. I got the stains out of the passenger seat. You probably wouldn't be impressed, but the guy who owns it tipped me $20 and said, "You got the soul back in it." And I smiled all the way to the next stop. Note 3. The grocery store again. Your almond milk is still on the shelf. I saw it today. That exact brand you used to tell people you drank because it was better for your skin. But I always knew it was just because your mom did. I passed it twice. Almost reached for it out of habit. But I didn't. I bought oat milk. Not because I like it better, but because I wanted something that had never touched your mouth. Note 4. About that party. You told the story like you were trying to make people laugh. but I saw you watching them watch you. That kind of laugh, it wasn't about joy. It was performance. You made my work a punchline to win the room. And what stung wasn't the words. It was how easy it came to you. Like my pride was disposable. Like all those nights I came home on my feet, exhausted and happy, meant less to you than a 5-second giggle from someone you'd forget by morning. Do you even remember his name? The one who said, "Do you ever get tired of being dirty?" And you just smiled. Note 5. I'm not mad. This isn't some bitter spiral. I don't want you back. I'm not writing these to guilt you or expose you or win anything. I'm writing them because there's a part of me that spent 2 years whispering into a locked room. And now the door's open, and I don't know how to stop talking. Maybe I just want to see what my voice sounds like when I'm not apologizing for being who I am. Note 6. The thing I never said. You always hated silence. You filled it with sound. Music, talking, podcasts, the hum of something always playing. I used to think that made you energetic, alive. Now I wonder if it was fear. Maybe silence was too honest for you. Maybe it said things you weren't ready to hear. I used to turn the volume down when you left the room. I liked hearing the house breathe. I liked the honesty of it. That should have told me everything. Note 7. You were never the whole story. You were a chapter. Maybe even a long one, but not the book. I'm learning that now. There are pages that come after you. Some are slow. Some are joyful. Some are just blank. And that's okay too. I don't have to rush to fill them. I don't have to bleed on them just to prove something. I'm allowed to write in pencil. I'm allowed to cross things out. I'm allowed to take my time. Note 8. The last one. I won't send any of these. Not because I'm afraid, but because they were never really for you. They were for the man I was becoming, one compromise at a time. They were for the man who stayed too quiet in too many rooms, afraid that if he said what he really felt, you'd leave. And maybe that's what love is supposed to be. Not staying, but listening. Not perfection, but presence. You taught me a lot, just not in the way I expected. And that's okay. There's this quiet hour just before sunset where everything turns gold for no reason. It hits the tops of buildings, the backs of mailboxes, the sides of people's faces. I used to rush through it, too busy, too distracted. But now I stop for it. I don't check my phone. I don't think about what I should be doing. I just let it wash over me like it's trying to remind me of something simple I forgot. That life still glows, even after the lights you depended on go out. It's been over 2 months since that rooftop party. Since the laughter. Since her words dropped like stones in a room full of people who didn't know I was drowning. And yet, when I think about it now, I don't feel pain. Not anymore. What I feel is something quieter, gentler. A strange kind of gratitude. Because that night, for all its sting, gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost, myself. No, I didn't fall in love again. Not with someone new. I didn't shave my head or travel to a monastery or run a marathon. I just started waking up without a knot in my chest. I started cooking eggs the way I like them, not scrambled the way she preferred. I started playing music in the morning again. Real music, the kind that doesn't care if it's trendy or shareable. I started going to bed without rehearsing conversations in my head, where I proved my worth to someone who never asked to understand me in the first place. And the crazy part? I don't miss her. I miss the idea of partnership, the closeness, the knowing look across a room. But I now understand that I was alone long before I walked away. And that realization, while painful, has been the most freeing thing that's ever happened to me. These days, the business is doing better than ever. Funny how that works. When you stop trying to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's picture, everything begins to expand. I hired my first part-time employee, a teenager named Malik who's got more questions than confidence. And that's okay. I see myself in him. Not the polished version I tried to present, but the raw, curious kid who once believed that working hard with your hands was something to be proud of. Turns out it is. And I've been reconnecting. Not with Claire. That chapter is closed, respectfully and completely. But with people I drifted from while I was trying to mold myself into someone else's dream. Old friends. My mom, who said without judgment, "You seem lighter." Even my sister, who once told me, "I liked you better before she made you feel like you needed to wear collars." We laughed hard at that. And maybe most importantly, I've reconnected with silence. Not the kind that makes you feel ignored, but the kind that allows you to hear your own thoughts again. The kind that invites you to breathe deeply, not because you have to calm down, but because you're simply okay. I no longer need anyone to validate my life, to believe in its value. I don't need applause when I do something well. I don't need someone to dress it up in hashtags and captions. I don't need to be anyone's project or aesthetic or accessory to their success story. I just need real. And real, it turns out, was waiting for me the whole time. In my tools, in my quiet mornings, in the smell of wax and soap and pavement after rain. In the friendships I thought I'd outgrown but had only paused. In the man I was before I thought I had to be more to be loved. So here I am, still me, still working, still learning. But now I smile when I look in the mirror because the man staring back isn't a compromise. He's the whole damn thing.